Betsy. This is the first class in a series that I hope to be doing, and what I'd like to do today is talk a little bit about heaven. It's something that I don't know that we talk a whole lot about, and I'd like to really just lead a discussion on the subject of heaven. And I guess to begin, I'd like to ask you, when you think of heaven, what do you think of? Because the Bible describes it in a number of different ways, and I think that's what we'll try and do today, is look at some of the ways in which heaven is described in Scripture. So, Jim, I'm going to put you on the spot. When you think of heaven, what do you think of?
Leadership position here on earth that leaders are described as being in the heavens.
Okay.
I can't think of the verse, but people in ruling or with authority are described as having in the heavens.
Okay. Okay. Good. So if you were to pick one of those, right, it would be what?
God's dwelling place.
God's dwelling place. What else? How about you, Lizzie? What do you think of when you think of?
God's dwelling place with all the angels, and then just like bright white.
Bright white.
Yeah.
Bright white. Interesting. Why that?
I don't know. It's like an absence of everything, but everything is there.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah. Well, God is often described in terms of, light.
Mm-hmm.
God is light. And so I think that's, you can understand where you come from there.
But even like Moses, after he spoke to God, his face was very bright.
Right, Kristen. Yeah. Yeah. So much so that he had to, cover it. Yeah. What else? What do you guys think of when you think of heaven? Clouds. And I think that's good, because that's one of the first things that we see when we come to the Bible. I mean, heaven is described as the sky. In other words, in Genesis chapter 1, it says, "In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth." And the heavens there is really described as anything that is not here. Anything above is described as the heavens. So I think that's a perfect example. And let's just take a look at a couple of those. So, we talked about Genesis, but let's go over to Psalm 68. Anybody have that they'd like to read for us? Psalm 68, and we'll read verse 34. Yeah?
Ascribe strength to God, his excellence is over Israel, and his strength is in the clouds.
And his strength is in the clouds. Yeah. So, what version is that?
New King James.
New King James, yeah? Proclaim the power of God, whose majesty is over Israel, whose power is in the skies. So power in the clouds, power in the skies, sort of the same idea, that heaven is described as just that. You look up and that's heaven. Psalm 148, anybody turn that one up yet?
Let them praise the name of the Lord, for his name alone is excellent. His glory is above the earth and heaven.
Yeah. His glory is above the earth and heaven. Okay, so those are some verses that will relate to that. Then when we continue to think about it, I think more often than not, when I think about heaven, I think of it just as Jim described, or as Lizzie described. It's the dwelling place of God. And I think that more than anything, when we look at heaven described that way, it's described that way because it helps us understand the transcendence of God over all of humanity. God is above everything. He is more powerful than anything. And consequently, what I'd like to suggest this morning is that when we think of God in heaven as a place, it's really a metaphor. It's it's using this idea that God is up there as a metaphor to teach us that God is all powerful, that God is all transcendent. He is over and above everything. And yeah, Dan.
That's a human beings who experience that, right? I mean, that's why they built the Tower of Babel. They wanted to exalt themselves. So when you're up high and you're looking down, you have a feeling of being elevated. Like, not just elevated in terms of elevation, but like you are more important, right? You're looking down at all this. When you're in an airplane, you look down and it's like this vast expanse is underneath you. You know,
Yeah.
There's a psychological component that we have
Yeah.
with height
Yeah.
in terms of how we look at things.
Yeah. I heard the story about, I think it was Donald Trump, who in his office has a chair that's quite a bit higher than the chairs in the room. So that when you go and you sit down, you are sitting much lower than he is.
Yeah.
And that he is all powerful and over you.
Well, yeah, Solomon's throne, right, is up 6 steps above everybody.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right. And that's a theme that we'll see. We're going to talk a little bit, God willing, about the idea of the throne. But it does illustrate this idea of power. And when you think about warfare, where would they try and set the city? Up on a hill, because it's more difficult to fight. Yeah. So let's take a look at some of these passages here that describe heaven as a metaphor for God's space. And do you understand what I mean by God's space? So going back to Genesis 1. Genesis 1, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And it seems to me that the heavens is God's space and the earth is man's space. And this is a theme that we're going to see throughout the scriptures, that we have parts of creation that are heavenly and parts of creation that are earthly. I guess that's kind of not really explaining things, is it? Godly and what's another word for us?
Earthly.
Earthly, yeah, or another word. How would you describe it? Why, hello, Sandra. Glad you could make it today.
Was it 9:30?
Yeah.
For those of you online, this is Steve's wife. That he's warmly welcoming to our class.
Good morning, everybody.
Good morning, Savannah. Yeah. Okay, so Sandra, just to bring you up to speed. So what we're doing is we're talking about heaven and earth. We're talking about heaven as being a metaphor for God's space, earth being a metaphor for man's space. God's dimension, man's dimension. And then if you turn to Deuteronomy chapter 26, let's just, we're going to work our way through some of these passages just to get a feel for how the scripture points us to it. So Deuteronomy 26 and the 15th verse. So what's happening here is Moses is reminding the people that they are to follow God's ways. So if you look at the 14th verse or the 13th verse, it says, "Then say to Yahweh your God, I've removed from my house the sacred portion and have given it to the Levite." So what's happening here is the people are being instructed to approach their God, Yahweh, and to explain to their God that they're doing all the things that he had commanded them to do. And so that's what we read in verses 13 and 14. And then because they have done the things that God had commanded, verse 15 says that they are to basically ask God, "Look down from heaven, your holy dwelling place, and bless your people Israel and the land you have given us as you promised on oath to your forefathers, a land flowing with milk and honey." And the point that we're trying to draw out here is that from the standpoint of that ancient Jewish people, they looked to the heavens as the physical location point of their God. Look down from heaven, your holy dwelling place. Your holy dwelling place. Psalm 2. Any comments about that? Psalm 2. Verse 1. Why do the nations conspire and the peoples plot in vain? The kings of the earth take their stand and the rulers gather together against Yahweh and against his anointed one. Let us break the chains, they say, and throw off their fetters. The one enthroned in heaven laughs, and the Lord scoffs at them. Then he rebukes them in anger and terrifies them in his wrath, saying, I have installed my king on Zion, my holy hill. So what's the point here in verse 4 that the psalmist is drawing out?
The point is, the earth is flesh, and the heavens are spirit.
Yeah.
Flesh and sin on the earth, spirit and righteousness in the heavens.
Yeah, I think that's really what I was trying to describe when I was trying to explain God's space and man's space. I think that's perfectly described, Gordon. That's good. And here in this particular passage in Psalms, the psalmist is drawing this contrast between the almighty powerful kings of the world that are coming against Israel and against God's Holy One, the anointed king. And they're saying, look, these, as powerful as these manly and earthly kings think they might be, they pale in comparison to our God Yahweh, who is enthroned in heaven. He is more powerful than all. And the point that's being brought out here, again, is that God's dwelling place is in heaven. God is enthroned in heaven. Let's look what it says in the 115th Psalm. Verse 1. Not to us, O Yahweh, not to us, but to your name be the glory because of your love and faithfulness. Why do the nations say, where is their God? See, the psalmist is pointing to the fact that these powerful nations that are surrounding the land of Israel are mocking the Jews. They're saying, where is their God? They don't have idols that we can point to. Where is their God? Mockingly. Verse 3, they respond, our God is in heaven, and he does whatever pleases him. But their idols are silver and gold made by the hands of men. Again, the contrast here. The point is, God is dwelling in heaven. He's enthroned in heaven. Our God is in heaven. Psalm 66 Isaiah 66 is a passage which Jesus quotes. But let's turn to Isaiah. Verse 1. And just, Jesus quotes these things. These verses here that we're about to read are the concluding passages that Stephen read in his speech before he was stoned. And so Isaiah says, this is what Yahweh says, heaven is my throne and the earth my footstool. And there's this continual metaphor that the scriptures use that help us describe God in a way that we can understand. Mankind, I think, by and large, has a difficult time understanding the uncreated God. How do we comprehend that? And the way that the Bible tries to explain it, I think, is through this idea of metaphor, saying, well, who's the most powerful person that a human might know? Well, in these days, it was the king. And so the Bible goes through to show that Yahweh, the God of the Israelites, is more powerful than any king. And he is enthroned in the heavens, and the earth is his footstool. This is all the language that this ancient people would have understood. So it is a metaphor. And then, Lizzie, we get to the point where you say, you describe God, or when you think of God, you think of heaven, you think of white. And this was something that, again, in visions, the prophets would see. They would see heaven in a vision, and they would describe it as God's throne room. And so my question is, do you think there is an actual place somewhere where there is a physical throne room of God? What do you think? Like, when you think of heaven, is heaven like up there? Where is God?
He's everywhere.
He's everywhere, right? I mean, this is basic stuff, but when we think about it, we think of it as like up. Like almost like there's this space. If you get to the highest of heavens, there's this like room, and that's where God is. But I think God is everywhere. And the way that I've come to think of it is almost like a dimension. Heaven is a dimension that I can't see, but it's right here. God is right here among us. And it's this power that just envelops us. And so from a standpoint of explaining it, I think it explains it in a way that people could understand. But I like to think of it as just this dimension that is unseen by human eye. And there were times when it was opened up and people could see. What would be an example of that? Can anybody think of one?
Was it Elijah? It says, open his eyes that he may see, and like there's just angels everywhere.
Angels everywhere.
Right.
Yeah.
Elisha, yeah.
Elisha, right?
yeah,
Right. And Jesus in the garden says, could I not call upon my Father? And he, there's tens of thousands of angels there who are ready to support him. And I think that these things, this is the dimension of heaven. I'm just going to...
The scriptures speak of God dwelling in light and approachable, though no man has seen or can see.
Yeah.
Which would lead credence to your dimensional analogy.
Yeah. Yeah.
Something that's unapproachable by man, at least for the time being.
That's right.
And also the scriptures speak of spiritual bodies and natural bodies.
What do you think it means by that, Bob?
I think that means that there's only two types of existence. There's a spiritual and there's a natural. We have a natural existence now, but we strive for a spiritual.
Yes.
Which would open that, for lack of a better word, another dimension that you speak of.
And let's think can you draw that forward to Jesus in the garden after his resurrection?
After his resurrection? Well, of course, after his resurrection, he's a new body.
Yeah. Right, he says, don't touch me. I've not yet been changed.
Okay.
And-
Well, that's before he's resurrected. That's after the raising of the dead.
Right.
But he has not yet put on immortality.
Right, and I guess that's my point, right? So he's been raised from the dead. He's not been yet made immortal. But when he's made immortal, he's changed.
Yes.
However, there's a component to it, right? That he appears in the room in the midst of them without coming through a door. Like, they don't open the door for him. He's just there.
That was after
Shop.
after he had been changed.
Right. So he's not. So I see the spiritual as not bound by the laws of physics that hold us where we are. Like, people come and go. Philip, he's with the eunuch, and then boom, he finds himself
In
someplace
Azotus.
else. Yeah.
Yeah.
He's gone.
Yeah.
Like, someone explained it to me one time, like, if you imagine that our world is like this sheet of paper and God looks down, he can move pieces, like on a chessboard. He can pick it up and put it here, and for all intents and purposes, we have been transported to a different place. That's the way the angels can work. They can come and go, not bound by the laws that hold mortal people.
Yeah.
And we have to walk from point A to point B.
Jim?
It's also, I think, not bound by, we're talking about space, it's also not bound by time.
By time, right, yeah.
Because Isaiah in Isaiah 6 sees a vision, he's there.
Right.
And he sees a vision of the kingdom thousands of years later, or
Yeah.
1,000 years later.
Yeah, yeah.
Thousands of years later.
And, you know, an example that I can think of is the Transfiguration,
Yeah.
Right.
right? I mean, is this another example where we've got this, you know, we're not bound by time, that Moses can appear? You know, I think we're getting beyond what I planned to talk about today. But we've got, you know, I think Bob's point is there's the spiritual realm. I don't want to put words in your mouth. How did you describe it? You've got,
That's fair.
yeah, spiritual
There's a
realm.
spiritual body and
Spiritual.
a natural body.
Yeah, spiritual body and natural body.
And
Thanks,
I
Bob.
think that would extend beyond the human frame
Yeah, yeah,
to
yeah.
everything.
So I want to go through and look at God's throne room. But before I do that, I want to bring up this verse, Psalm 115. Even the heavens are the Lord's, but the earth He has given to the children of men. And there was a time when people looked at this verse and said that the Apollo spacecraft was destined to failure because God would not allow man to go into heaven. And they pointed to this verse as an example of that. Even the heavens are Yahweh's, but the earth He has given to the children of men. Again, it gives this idea of God's space, man's space. And I think what this helps me understand is it's not necessarily a physical location, but it's a realm. It's a dimension, if you will, not a physical location. Okay. Let's go and take a look at some of these passages about the throne room. The first place I'd like us to go is into Chronicles. We'll look at 2 Chronicles, chapter 18. This is Micaiah, and it's a prophecy. And he's prophesying against one of the enemies of Israel. Micaiah continued in verse 18, and he says, "Therefore hear the word of Yahweh. I saw Yahweh sitting on His throne with all the host of heaven standing on His right and on His left. And Yahweh said, Who will lure Ahab, king of Israel, into attacking Ramoth Gilead and going to his death there?" So, what's happening here is Ahab is prophesying. I guess he's prophesying against Ahab, the king of Israel, not against an enemy of Israel. Prophesying against Ahab. But the point in verse 18 is that in his vision, he saw the God of Israel sitting on His throne with His host of heaven standing in His right hand, or standing around Him. Today's vision, today's vernacular, what does the word host mean?
Multitude.
I'm sorry?
Multitude.
Multitude?
Army.
Army? Army? Anybody else? I think that's it. I like the idea of a group of authority figures or an army, the host of heaven. And so in this particular metaphor, we see we see heaven being described as one where there is power and where there is authority, that He is in charge. Then we come down to Hebrews chapter 12 in the New Testament. This is that passage where Jesus, Hebrews chapter 11 is the chapter of those faithful saints of old who endured persecution, who endured trouble, and kept their faith. That's everybody that's listed in Hebrews 11 are individuals who faced difficulty in life, yet never gave up on their faith. And when we turn the page to chapter 12, we see the writer saying, look, we are surrounded by this great cloud of witnesses. If you look at all of these wonderful people in chapter 11, none of whom gave up their faith in spite of the difficulty. We look at those people as examples. Now we can turn our attention to the greatest example of perseverance in face of difficulty of all time, and that's Jesus. And Jesus endured the cross, and he scorned the shame for the joy that was set before him. And when we read about this, we read, anybody have it turned up? Would you read the first 2 or 3 verses?
Wherefore, seeing we are also compassed about with so great a cloud of witnesses, let us lay aside every weight, and the sin which doth so easily beset us, and let us run with patience the race that is set before us, looking unto Jesus, the author and finisher of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and is set down at the right hand of the throne of God.
So, for the joy that was set before him, he was able to endure these things. And he's been rewarded with majesty and honor. He's now set at the right hand of God. Again, we're looking at the throne room. It's a place of power and authority. It's a place of great majesty and honor. Psalms tells us it's a place of perfect justice. Who was I talking to at Bible class? We were talking about politics, and I think somebody made the comment about, won't it be wonderful when we have a righteous king who will make all the decisions? And when we think about a king, a king is great so long as the king has his mind on what is right. But if the king is thinking on what's best for me and my family, as opposed to what's best for you and your family, his decisions aren't going to be honorable. And that's the problem that humanity has always had, right? Humanity has always had the problem that at some point we decide, well, I have to make a decision, and it's going to be either for my benefit or against my benefit. I'll make the decision for my benefit. But won't it be a wonderful time when we have a king who's not influenced by those things, who's a perfect judge, who offers perfect justice? That's the king that we're looking for. Somebody said democracy is the best form of government. It's
Compared to
not.
all the rest.
Say it again?
Compared to all the rest.
Compared to all the rest. But the best form of government is going to be having a righteous king, a monarch, who will make those decisions which are in our best interest and in God's best interest. Right? And that's what we read about in Psalms. We'll just pick up, let's look at Psalm 9 and 7. Yahweh reigns forever. He has established his throne for judgment. He will judge the world in righteousness. He will govern the peoples with justice. Yahweh is a refuge for the oppressed, a stronghold in times of trouble. I mean, that's what we're looking forward to, isn't it, brothers and sisters? And this is how the throne room is described. It's a place of power, it's a place of majesty, it's a place of perfect justice. It's a place of sovereignty and holiness. It's a place of praise. We're not going to go through all of these passages, but I think you get the sense here. Any comments, any thoughts about that? Run out of battery here.
That one's interesting because
Which one?
this you talked about the Apollo program.
Yeah.
It's just like maybe 2 years ago. Were you aware that the brothers, the twins, one was on the International Space Station for a year,
Yeah.
and one was on Earth, and they checked all their vital statistics. When the one who came back after a year in space, he has incredible health problems, loss of bone mass, loss of muscle mass. We're not designed to live in that arena, and through their idea of putting men on other planets, they have proved God correct. We can't live in that environment for
Yeah,
extended time.
yeah.
And he's terribly sick. I mean, they were both equally healthy, and he's got incredible.
Were they both
It's in Time
astronauts?
magazine, actually. Yeah, they're both in the astronaut program.
Can you imagine the brother that got the news? Sorry, you're not going.
Yeah.
Nuts.
Yeah, well, he was
Right.
disappointed. Yeah.
Yeah.
But they just did. I'm pretty sure it was in Time magazine. There's a whole article on it.
Huh.
It was pretty riveting, actually.
Huh.
From our standpoint,
Yeah.
it proves that verse.
Yeah.
We don't
Yeah.
do very well beyond 20,000 feet, never mind.
Yeah, even on our own planet, we
Yeah.
have a very narrow area in which we can live.
You don't go up to the
I'm
top.
not doing very well beyond age 55, let alone height. I can hardly stand this morning. Yeah. Yeah. But the question is it a physical location? Can we point to, a map or can we get out our telescope and point it to the sky and say, there it is. There's the throne room.
No,
I don't think we can.
no.
No, because it's part of creation. God created it.
So
It had to be somewhere before that, right?
yeah, right. And it seems like the universe is ever expanding. So help me understand what it meant in Acts, where we read about Jesus. This same Jesus who you have seen go into heaven will come in like manner. Walk me through that in your mind. If heaven is not a physical place that you can point to in the sky, what was happening there?
Well, at that point, Jesus is now a new creature,
Yeah,
and he's able to go places or do things that a normal man cannot do.
right.
He can, if, for lack of a better expression, he can enter that other dimension that you speak
Yeah,
of,
yeah,
where the law of physics don't allow us to do so, but God does.
yeah.
So.
That makes sense to
I
me.
don't think, I can't recall anybody in scripture ever ascending into heaven before entering into a state of immortality. I mean, angels are there, but all angels are immortal. God's there, God is immortal. Jesus is there, and Jesus is immortal.
Yes, yeah,
So, I would say it's, in that sense, it's not meant for us to enter into, and we can't. But I don't think flying into space qualifies for that definition, because God's as much here as he is,
I like the way you word that, Bob. God is as much here as he is in the space.
You could say he ascended in a cloud, and he's going to come with the cloud and great glory. But I take it to mean it's going to be miraculous.
Yeah.
Nobody floats up to heaven on a cloud prior or since, right?
Right.
So it was miraculous, his
Right.
ascension.
Right,
His return is also going to be miraculous, and unmistakably so,
right.
right? Every eye will see him.
That's right.
There's no
Jim?
denying
I
it.
think, when you talk about this idea of him ascending up in a cloud, I think there was a reason why that's what they chose, although he probably could have just gone into the other dimension like that. But remember when Elijah disappears, they go looking for him.
Right.
So if Jesus was just disappeared, well, where'd he go? Then people would be looking for him. No, we saw where he went. He ascended up into a cloud. So I think that was chosen for the benefit.
For the
of people.
benefit of the witnesses.
Right, right.
It makes a lot of sense
It's
to
like
me.
Jacob's ladder, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So-
They don't
Yeah.
really need a ladder.
Doesn't need a ladder, but right, yeah.
Right.
But even more so in this case, because Jesus is supposed to be dead. He was crucified.
Right.
So they could just say, well, where is he? Disappeared. Oh, well,
Yeah, and that could be.
We crucified him. That's where he is. He's dead. There was no Jesus.
Dead and buried, right.
This was an elaborate hoax, a very good hoax, but it was a hoax. But an ascension of that magnitude, you can't dispute.
With witnesses.
Yes, you
Yeah.
can't dispute that. He didn't disappear. He ascended,
Yeah, yeah,
and with instructions on how he's returning.
yeah, yeah. That's good. Okay. So what we see next, I want to just bring up two passages that sort of emphasize again that heaven isn't this, one spot in the sky that we can point to. And we get an idea in two different passages that I found in Scripture that point to the idea that it really isn't a physical location. So the first is in 1 Kings. We'll look at chapter 8. This is the chapter that describes the Ark of the Covenant being brought into Solomon's temple. So this is a big deal in the history of Israel. And in 1 Kings chapter 8, verse 27, we are picking up in the midst of Solomon's prayer of dedication. So the ark has been brought into the temple. They've been building this house for God. We'll pick it up in verse 23, where Solomon begins his prayer. He says, "O Yahweh, God of Israel, there's no God like you in heaven above or on the earth below. You keep your covenant of love with your servants who continue wholeheartedly in your way. You have kept your promise to your servant David, my father. With your mouth you've promised, and with your hand you've fulfilled it, as it is today. Now, Yahweh, God of Israel, keep for your servant David, my father, the promises you made to him when you said, 'You shall never fail to have a man to sit before me on the throne of Israel, if only your sons are careful in all they do to walk before me as you have done. And now, O God of Israel, let your word that you promised your servant David, my father, come true.'" Here's the point. But will God really dwell on the earth? The heavens, even the highest heaven, cannot contain you. So the point here is God can't be contained in one spot. His presence is all over. God's presence is here on earth just as much as it is in the heavens above. And one of the things that I hope to do next week is talk a little bit about God's space and man's space. The plan from the beginning was that God and man would dwell together. We saw that in the Garden of Eden, the Garden of Perfection, where God and man dwelled together. Man sinned, separated himself from God. And now, God's space and man's space aren't melded together the way we'd like. Our sin separates us. But there are examples where we see the two co-joining. The temple is one example, the mercy seat. We see it in the story of Jacob's ladder. This is God's space. We'll see it in a couple of different places. But in the end, these examples we see are just glimpses of what we will experience in the kingdom when Revelation tells us God and man will dwell together again. So that's one of the things that I hope to do in the coming week. But what I wanted to try and focus on today was this idea that God's space isn't just up there, that it's a dimension, and that God is here among us as much as we can imagine. We'll conclude by looking at Jeremiah chapter 23. Verse 24. So, in the 16th verse of Jeremiah chapter 23, we have the beginning of a discussion where God is speaking. This is what Yahweh Almighty says. "Do not listen to what your prophets are prophesying to you. They will fill you with false hopes. They speak visions from their own minds, not from the mouth of Yahweh." And so, from that passage in verse 16 to verse 24, we have the words of God. And I want to just look at the last few verses. Verse 20, the anger of Yahweh will not turn back until he fully accomplishes the purpose of his heart. In the days to come, you will understand it clearly. I did not send these prophets, yet they've run with their message. I did not speak to them, yet they've prophesied. But if they had stood in my counsel, they would have proclaimed my words to my people and would have turned them from their evil ways and from their evil deeds. Am I only a God nearby, declares Yahweh, and not a God far away? Can anyone hide in the secret places so that I cannot see him, declares Yahweh? Do I fill heaven and earth? Do not I fill heaven and earth, declares Yahweh? And that's the point. Our God fills heaven and earth. He is all around us. And right now, in our state, we don't have the ability to open our eyes and see that dimension. But I truly believe it's there. And I think when we view it that way, it can give us great comfort to know that we have a God who loves us and is here with us, if only we have eyes to see. Okay, that's